Hare Krishna. I am Narahari Das from the Hawaiian Islands, and I've been asked the lovely question, how I came to Krishna Consciousness. Well, I suppose the short answer is by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada and Prabhupada's disciples. That would be the quick answer, but I think you're looking more for the longer one. And I guess that would begin by explaining that I was born, well, back in 1948, which means that when I went to college, it was in the 60s. My whole college career was 1966 through 1970, which was the peak of that sort of 60s generation. And at that time, we were a little fed up with the regular norms. The Vietnam War was taking place, President Johnson, and we saw so much hypocrisy. And we just began questioning the values of our society. I was attending the University of Maryland. My plan was to go into medicine. And so I was studying zoology and psychology. But my college years were very distracted by what was taking place, sort of a spiritual revolution, if you will. You know, it was a time of experimentation with different types of psychedelic drugs, and I was part of that generation. Marijuana, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline. But it wasn't drugs for the sake of taking drugs and getting high. It was, we were looking for something deep. We were looking for other types of consciousness. And I found it very satisfying and very interesting, particularly LSD. But the problem is that you would have these amazing experiences, change of consciousness, but you'd always come back down again and get stuck back where you were. So we began reading books from the East, books about Buddhism, Tibetan Book of the Dead, and started to get the idea that there were yogis who, by internal meditation without any type of intoxication, were reaching apparently levels of consciousness that were infinitely beyond what we were experiencing and never really coming down from it. So that became very interesting, but I had no access. These were yogis off in the Himalayan mountains, as we were reading, and from a very, very different culture. And I was busy planning on going into medicine and pursuing that career. Then, one day in I believe it was 1967, when we all had long hair and long beards, I walked out onto the mall at our university and I saw for the first time devotees. What a sight! Shaved heads. Now, back in the 60s, nobody shaved their head. Maybe Hugh Brenner or Telly Savalas, a few movie stars. But nobody shaved their heads. And not only that, piercing wasn't at all in vogue. When I saw the devotees, the men had shaved heads with these little ponytails in the back. The women had pierced ears, pierced noses, little chains running about. And they were wearing different color robes. And they were playing these drums and cymbals. And it was the most unusual, yet somehow familiar and somehow almost scary sound that I was hearing. And I remember standing, listening to the kirtan, of course not knowing what kirtan was, and looking at the looks in their eyes. And I thought, my God, these people have got to be in some other realm, and it interests me very much. So when the kirtan ended, I remember going up and speaking with them, and one of them, I gave it a donation, and they gave me a Back to Godhead magazine, which I took home and tried to read, but I guess I wasn't ready. I wasn't able to fully understand it. But that was my first contact, that sound of kirtan and speaking with devotees. Somehow at that time, the seed was planted in my heart. In fact, I remember one devotee saying to me, Krishna, he gave me a card and had the Krishna mantra on it. And he said, say Krishna. And I repeated Krishna. And he said, say it again, Krishna, Hare Krishna. He got me saying the whole mantra. And he said, it feels wonderful to chant this mantra, doesn't it? And I was thinking, well, it's okay. It didn't seem that great, but interesting. So I took the little card home and I began to chant that mantra and try to read the magazine. But somehow I guess I wasn't ready at that time to really dive in deeply. So it wasn't until a couple of years later that a friend of mine, who, Madan Mohan Das, very, very dear friend since we were 10 years old, we were living on the East Coast, and this was the summer of 1970. We'd all graduated college, and he met the devotees, and he joined the temple. So he sent me a Bhagavad Gita, and this was the original Bhagavad Gita with what was that? Denise Leverton and Allen Ginsberg, forwarded by them. And my friend said that I've joined the Hare Krishnas. I want you to read this Bhagavad Gita and tell me if you can find some fault in it. And if you can find some fault, please let me know. He tricked me. So I read the Bhagavad Gita, and it took me several days, maybe longer, maybe a couple of weeks even. I don't remember. But when I read about karma, somehow the subject of karma cut so deeply into my heart that it just scared the daylights out of me. Because I was here, at the time I was living in South Florida, and I was playing music. I was a jazz drummer. I was playing music at the time and living what I thought, a pretty good life. And but when I started reading about karma, it's like, wow, things are good now, but they may not be so good in the future. And I could remember back in my life of so many good things I did, but also so many bad things that I did, people that I've hurt, and various transgressions against other living entities. Somehow the subject of karma, I got it, and it scared me. It was very sobering. So I decided to go to the Krishna temple and talk with the devotees there, because I've never really had a serious talk with devotees. So I remember I was living on a little organic farm, and we were raising Rhode Island red chickens, and we were selling the eggs, brown eggs, at the health food store. So I decided I would take a dozen eggs to the temple and give that to them as a gift. I had them all cleaned up and boxed up and ready to get on my motorcycle and ride to the Krishna temple. My girlfriend was with me. But just before I left, I thought, I think I read something about they don't eat eggs. So last minute I put the eggs away, but rode off to the temple, and I remember knocking on the door. It was a church, and there was a door down below, and I knocked on the door, and this very blissful looking person came to the door and looked at me with a big smile on his face, and I said, I've been reading your Bhagavad Gita, and I have a list of questions that I'd like to discuss with you. And his smile went ear to ear, and he said to me, this is exactly what I said, I'll never forget. He said, that makes my heart as jubilant as a peacock. So he led me in, and we went down the hallway, and he took me to this room, and all of a sudden some curtains opened, and smoke incense came bellowing out, and there were these little golden dolls. And he said, we're going to do a little singing first. I think I'd mentioned to him that I was a drummer, a professional drummer. So he gave me some cart dolls and showed me how to play them. And then he grabbed this organ that he was pumping by hand, and he started singing. And I got to tell you, this guy sang like an angel. It was the most beautiful sound. And he would smile at me because I had that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It was easy for me because I was a percussionist. And then after that chanting was over, I wasn't chanting with him, but just listening. And then he began to answer my questions. And one after another, he was giving me these beautiful answers to my questions. So he asked me if I would like something to eat. I believe he used the word prasadam. And I said yes. And he said, well, just wait a few moments. And he walked out. Another devotee came in, and he put some prasadam before me. And he asked me, did I know who I was speaking with? And I said, no, I didn't really get his name. He said, oh, his name was Vishnu Janmashtami. So Vishnu Janmashtami was the first devotee I ever had a conversation with. And he was playing in Peacock Park in Coconut Grove. His bus was there in Miami. And of course, he invited me to come to Peacock Park. And interestingly, they had a set of drums there. And I believe it was Yogeshwar who was playing the drums and so on. But Vishnu Jana asked me if I would play. And because I was a jazz drummer, I guess he really liked it. So I would come regularly and play with Vishnu Jana and the devotees in Peacock Park. And we became really good friends. In fact, on many of the albums or the tapes that we hear of Vishnu Jana Swami, I was playing. So Vishnu Jana Swami was very kind to me, and he sort of took me under his wing and was always there to answer my questions and sort of make me feel like I had a friend in spiritual life. And also about that time, Abhirama Prabhu came to Hawaii, and he was becoming the new temple president. And Abhiram was also a wonderful devotee, and he was also answering my questions. I had lots of questions and lots of little challenges. And Abhiram really knew how to put his arm around someone and make them feel like you've got a friend, somebody that is interested in your spiritual life. And he just wants to give. So I think I was kind of a hard person to get to come and surrender. But Abhirama was expert, and he just knew how to just gradually reel me in. He asked me to come and spend a little time at the temple helping them. I was good at fixing things. So anyway, I decided to make an experiment, and I never planned to stay for long, but I thought that I would come and stay at the temple for a while and just sort of see how things go. This was in, I guess, the latter part of 1972. So I was living in a truck at the time, a big sort of a step van. It was an old paddy wagon, what the police used to use to take people to jail, but it was all fixed up inside with a propane stove and so on. And I had a Labrador Retriever that was living with me, but Abhiram was very liberal, and the devotees were living in Coconut Grove in this big compound with mango trees and banyan trees, and some people were living in arks, and I mean, it was just like an old hippie haven. And so I drove my truck and moved in there and basically stayed with the devotees. And next thing I knew, as I was helping out, Abhiram asked me to engage some of the new people, and which I did. The next thing you know, they're calling me the temple commander, and that name didn't seem to go away. And then next thing I know, they asked me to sign some paper, and Abhiram and I were very close. So as a young devotee, somehow not many people had read even the few books that Prabhupada had, and somehow I read them all. And so I was asked to give classes kind of early on, so next thing you know, I signed this thing. I was the vice president, and then after 3 years, they made me the president. Abhiram went on to go do some other things, and I guess it's all history from there. I never really planned to stay. I thought I would just make spiritual life a little part of who I am and what I do. But it just grew and grew and grew, and it embraced my heart. And next thing I knew, without me even knowing it, I had become a full-time devotee. So I guess this is a story of how I came to Krishna consciousness. Everybody has a different wonderful tale to say, but ultimately I'll go back to my original answer. How did I come? Ultimately, it was simply the mercy of Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's wonderful disciples. I had the great fortune of having several personal meetings with Srila Prabhupada. Probably the most memorable, though they're all memorable, was when he gave me an instruction of what to do, what service I should pursue. And this was in 1976 in Potomac, Maryland. I was the temple president in Miami. We had gotten a new property, which I believe it was a several-acre mango grove, and we were turning this into sort of a transcendental paradise. We dug a pond, and we had swans and beautiful thatched buildings and flower gardens, and we were planting all kinds of exotic tropical fruit trees. So I showed Srila Prabhupada some of the pictures, and Prabhupada obviously was very happy. Beautiful smile on his face, and then he looked at me and he said, "So you like to preach?" And I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." He said, "So you make beautiful places like this that will remind people of the spiritual world. And when they come into a beautiful tropical setting like this, they'll be open to hear spiritual knowledge, because it's like they're experiencing Krishna's natural beauty, particularly his tropical beauty." And so that really became my service. We developed a beautiful project in Miami, went to Hawaii and developed a beautiful project there, and then I developed an independent project, a house that looks like something from a storybook. And again, waterfalls and ponds and bridges and tropical splendor everywhere. And it was so true that exactly as Prabhupada instructed me, so many people wanted to come and see these beautiful places. And it's such a great opportunity to preach and to speak and to give them Prabhupada's books and just try to plant that seed that was somehow planted in my heart by Vishnu Janmashtami and Abhiram. Together, the devotees had planted that seed, and that really became my greatest joy in spiritual life. Preaching, I would say my favorite is not so much speaking to devotees, which I love doing, giving Srimad Bhagavatam classes and so on, but I particularly love speaking to new people. Kind of like if I was a doctor, I like to think of myself as like a pediatrician. When you talk to someone who's never heard that we're not the body, they've never heard about karma, or they've never really talked seriously about it. And then by speaking on that subject and somehow trying to cut through that false ego, find that little opening and plant that seed of bhakti by speaking Shabda Brahma, spiritual sound. And just like the day I first heard kirtan, that was spiritual sound entering my heart. And the seed was going in. So that's really my favorite service, is having beautiful places, have people come, and just try to somehow jumpstart that spiritual life. And always in preaching, I have to feel, we should all feel ourselves an instrument to Srila Prabhupada and the entire disciplic chain, because we are simply an instrument, just like Krishna told Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, Nimitta Matra Vavasati Sachin. Nimitta Matra, just become my instrument. And if we feel ourselves the instrument to our spiritual master, and Prabhupada being my spiritual master and the entire chain, then in that mood of humility that I can't do anything without my spiritual master's presence, then we become empowered. Sometimes people ask, well, what was it like when Prabhupada left? When he left the planet in 1977? How did that, what change took place? And I have to say that my realization in that regard is that Prabhupada truly never left. He may have left externally, but at every moment I feel Prabhupada in my heart. My life is dedicated to Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave me the most important instruction, the same one he gives to everyone, and that is to chant our 16 rounds every day, to follow very strictly the 4 regular principles, and simply do some service. And what that service may be is, in one sense, secondary to Prabhupada's most important desire, because it's important that we know the heart of the Guru. What is his real inner desire? What does Prabhupada really want from us? And I think the most important is that Prabhupada simply wants us to become Krishna conscious. I think there's no greater joy to the Guru, just like there's no greater joy to a father, than to see their child growing up and to see his disciples actually connecting with Krishna and detaching themselves from the material world and fully taking to this process has to be his greatest joy. So as I chant my rounds every day, and as I'm preaching or doing whatever service, I always feel Srila Prabhupada's presence with me. And it's that inspiration and that intimacy with Prabhupada that has carried me through and keeping me feel very strong. And I would like to particularly say to those who are not disciples of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada is there for everyone. We may have gurus that are disciples of Prabhupada, but we will connect not only to that guru, but to Prabhupada as our Parama Guru. It's kind of like you get 2 for the price of 1. Now I'm also accepting disciples, and I'm always telling them that if you're going to connect with me, you can't connect with me without connecting to Prabhupada. And really, of the 2, Prabhupada is your most important connection. Of course, my position is very important, but you're connecting to myself, to the Guru, whoever your Guru may be, and connecting to Prabhupada. And that is the healthiest relationship we can all possibly have. And knowing that of the 2, really the most important, the Guru with a capital G, is Prabhupada. He is the founder Acharya of ISKCON, and he is the grandfather of all future generations, and Prabhupada is there fully, 100% for everyone. So I beg all of you to please take to this process, make it your life, and open your heart fully to your Guru and Srila Prabhupada's presence. And if you're willing to take that course, I can promise that whatever you're thinking, how wonderful you think spiritual life may be, it's just a drop compared to the ocean of ecstasy awaiting as our love of Krishna begins to evolve. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.